And it says once again, Happy Tuesday. We're alive.
Jolly good live we are. Splendid.
Proof of life. Yep.
Yeah, proof of life. I'm not so sure some mornings. But I'm not going to beat about the bush. I'll just get Ruth to tell you about our wonderful, interesting, fascinating guest. And off you go.
We are really thrilled that this gentleman's been able to carve out some time for us. You won't believe the amount of projects and the world he runs in deconstructing the music. It's a lot of Beatles, but there's also some Pink Floyd and some other stuff that he will tell you about. It's a multimedia presentation. It's a TV series. It's been on PBS. And if you want to go to deconstructingthemusic.com, you can find out much more about it after the show. But in the meantime, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Scott Freiman.
Hello, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Hello.
Hi. Hi.
Thank you so much for carving out the time. I know what a busy boy you are. And also, I wanted to say thanks to Ken Womack for introducing us in the first place. Another busy boy, of course.
Another busy boy, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Ken puts us all to shame with how much he does.
Oh, I know. He's amazing, yes.
Yeah, no, I was just saying to you, Scott, before the show, Ken is the center, the cog in many wheels. He seems to be moving and shaking in many areas, especially.
He is, yes. Yes.
I watched him for ages before I even dared to ask him, would he be a guest on our show? Because I thought it would be far below him. But no, he said yes right away. And we've gone from strength to strength in our connections ever since. He's wonderful.
So he's our booking agent as well now. So thank you very
Oh,
much.
wow. How about that?
So how did you guys actually meet?
So we were both hired to do a lecture at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And I gave one day and he gave one the next. And I'd known about Ken from his books. This was, 10 years ago or so. So he had his first couple of Beatles books out. Yes. And we just hit it off.
Yeah.
And we started talking about various things and, calling each other and helping each other out a little bit with various things. And then when the pandemic hit, we were talking and we said, we have to do something. Everyone's sitting at home.
Yeah.
Maybe we can start a Beatles course. And we were swamped with people and it just became this thing. And from that, we built this online community that not only came to our classes every month, but we ended up taking 30 of them to Liverpool and London in 2023. And now we're restarting the class on October 23rd, actually tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Fab4masterclass.com. We're going to be doing a 5-year program. This year is just through the end of 63. That's how much material we have. And Ken, of course, has a tremendous amount of material. Yeah. I like to dive deep into the music. And the two of us, we have a lot of fun. And we involve people from the chat. And then we're also leading a trip to London, Liverpool, and Hamburg in 2025. So lots of exciting stuff.
Well, I will have to make sure that all your people know about Angie's book, Ticket to Ride, which is a place-by-place, blow-by-blow with a QR code for every single location.
It's great.
Liverpool, London, Hamburg, New York, and LA. So maybe we need to package that into their experience.
Absolutely. Well, we should definitely talk about giving it out to the people who come on the tour because it's an essential guide as your
yes, I've just mailed one this morning. Yeah, actually, to one of Mark Lapidos's people.
Yep.
It's in his catalog. And
So back to all of this musicology and deconstruction, which just absolutely fascinates me. I mean, I think most people, for what it's worth, not our crowd, not our viewers, but most people they put their earbuds in and they flip through a bunch of Spotify stuff and they just consume music like it's Skittles, right?
That's right.
Never really thinking about,
the
content of the lyrics or the instrumentation or the arrangements or whatever. How old were you when you were first aware of all the moving parts in any musical piece?
So I was a classically trained pianist. I started playing piano when I was 4 and 5, taking lessons. And my parents listened to Broadway and Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, So it was a hippie-ish uncle who first introduced me to the Beatles. And putting the Beatles on for the first time when I was 10 years old and hearing the instrumentation and hearing everything going on. From the beginning, I always wanted to dive deeper and understand, what is that sound I'm hearing, and how are they making this? And it wasn't until much later, when I became a full-time musician and producer, that I now had the technical chops to understand things about instruments and compression and limiting and all this stuff.
Right.
And I thought, I'm enjoying this. I wonder if other people would enjoy this as well.
Oh,
Because
boy.
there are people who love to dive deep and figure out
Yes.
how things are made. I think
Right.
it makes you appreciate the music even more.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I just think that, what I obviously grew up in a household with a ton of instruments laying around, so I was very aware of that. And Angie was ordained as a piano teacher at the age of 13. So we grew up in a musical household, obviously. But the first thing that really fascinated me, Beatles-wise, was when George brought in the sitar. I had never heard anything like it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, George Harrison, out of the four Beatles, he was the one who was always wanting to get a new guitar, a new effect, a new instrument. And he was the one who brought the Moog synthesizer into the Beatles.
That's right.
For
Yeah.
the Abbey Road. So yes, I mean, amazing to hear that sound, and very, very unusual for the time. 65 when it was on River Soul.
Absolutely.
No, I mean, we didn't have, in those days, we had a Chinese restaurant on Wirral in Heswell, but we didn't have an Indian restaurant. And so I would not have been exposed to the music as we are now, with all the Bollywood soundtracks and stuff that are out there. But I think that, the world at large has George to thank for being Curious George and bringing all these instruments into the mainstream.
Yeah.
No question.
I had this conversation with Jeff Emmerich, R.I.P., one day, and he's like, oh, every time we knew that they were coming in, and George was the one who'd booked the session, we'd be looking at each other going, oh, what are we going to have to mic now?
Yes, and from what I understand, I've never done it, but the sitar is a very hard instrument to mic.
Is it?
Because it has all of these strings, and it has strings which resonate with the other strings, and to pick it up and get the volume and the soft touch without distorting is very hard.
Yeah,
so they had their work cut out for them at Abbey Road. That's for sure.
Unlike, if you're used to miking a guitar, it has a flat back, right? I mean, it's a curved, but, figure of 8 body, and a sound hole is round. But like the later on Ovation guitars, the sitars had a rounded back, which propels the sound out of the sound hole in a completely different way.
Exactly. Yes. And you want to capture it the way it sounds live as much as you can. Yeah. And it's really, it takes some work.
Yeah. Paul had one at the house at Cavendish Avenue when I was about 6 or 7. I don't know if it was his or if it was just, taking up space in the corner. And I remember, trying to have a go at it. And I wouldn't even know where to start, which is the sharp was, So
yeah, it takes you all day just to tune it.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Oh, it's an absolute Zen thing, no doubt. And Ravi Shankar, obviously being the master of that, what a great time to be alive when you think about all the people who've lived in the very short space of the universe and time, from, Salvador Dali to Martin Luther King to JFK to the Beatles to Ravi Shankar. I mean, in the history of mankind and the universe, we've lived in a great window.
Yes, no question about it. And the 60s were certainly a fascinating time of cross-pollination. You could have, William Burroughs and Paul McCartney and Richard Harris and the Rolling Stones hanging out together. And one of the byproducts of our online world these days is we tend to get very siloed, and that that ability to mix with people who are different than us and bring things different, I think some of that has been lost, and they certainly had that in the 60s, especially in the mid 60s.
Right. At the Martin and I were lucky enough to be at the presenting at the Composers Breakfast. Richard Gibbs runs in Malibu every Monday. Martin and I did a presentation about McCartney.ai, which stands for audio intelligence, yesterday. And one of the other presenters there was a guy called Andreas from Cologne in Germany. And what he started is kind of brilliant. You might want to look into it. It's called audiotool.com. Is that right, Martz? Mm-hmm. And it's free. It's browser-based. And it's creating musical communities around the world for people to get into chat rooms and be able to write in real time together.
Oh, yes. I have read about it. Fascinating.
It's fascinating. And what he's trying to do is more of a social conscious mental health thing, to take kids out of their basement and doom scrolling and playing shoot 'em up games and get them into a social media platform where they can actually come out and create something at the end of the day with somebody across the world.
Right.
Which I think is really
wonderful
cool.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
I mean, it took George to meet Ravi Shankar to get them all on a plane to Rishikesh to even just get that one instrument into the Beatles.
That's right. You know, that's right.
Now we've got all this technology, and it's like, it's all out there. Give it a go, kids, you know?
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, when you think about the Beatles, you've got, you know, John bringing in, although Paul was really the first to bring in avant-garde into the Beatles, certainly John and Yoko had a lot of influence there. Paul's bringing in other musical influences. George bringing in the sitar, you know, and that is all fitting together and making something really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, Paul was greatly influenced by the colliery bands in the, you know, the coal mines, the coal pits, the, you know, the trombones and the trumpets and the brass bands of Northern England, which was something my dad loved. And, you know, hence the Black Dyke Mills band, right? On Thingamy Bob.
Right. That's right.
So I think just, again, the confluence of those four lads knowing each other, and then Ringo having the talent, not just the physical drumming talent, musical talent, but the brain power to arrange all of that together and hold it to a beat that the public didn't run away screaming from.
And be left-handed.
And be a southpaw.
Left-handed,
Yes. So what Ringo does so well is he comes up with parts that most drummers would not come up with. They're unusual. And if you listen to, you know, In My Life or A Day in the Life, I mean, Come Together, what he does on the drums is so iconic. And you can't imagine the song without it. And when I strip away the drums, the song just kind of drops, you know, it needs that, and it needs the creativity that he brought.
But it's Scott, if you listen to just the drum tracks, if you're lucky enough to be able to get near the stems or Giles or anybody, you still know what the song is. It's such an integral part of the arrangement.
Yes.
Yeah. You
know, I'm Team Ringo all the way. I mean, not that I'm not Team everybody, but I just thought growing up, and he was always so humble and nice and, you know, funny, happy-go-lucky. I mean, they all were, but Ringo was just he spent a lot of time in hospital as a child, and he was just very humbled by his health, I think, growing up. And he never took anything for granted. And I just don't think in those days, I don't think he got the credit from the music press.
No, he didn't initially.
From the fans, he certainly did, but the music press, he was just...
Yeah, and I think there's been a reevaluation. I think there are a lot of drummers who give him credit where it's due.
Absolutely.
I just heard his new country track. You know, he has a country album coming out, and it's wonderful. I was I was actually talking to Ken, and I was saying, you know, he could have had a whole career as a country singer. He fits it perfectly, and he might, right?
I mean, Angie's got 10 years on Ringo. There's life in the old that, right? So you know, he's fit and he's healthy and he's off the stuff, and so there's no reason why he couldn't, you know, go buy a nice pad in Nashville and start that whole gig. I hope he does. It'd be fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic. So speaking of playing, you know, strange places, tell me your Carnegie Hall story. What on earth?
So when how do I tell this shortly? So I had a whole career running a software company. I moved to New York to become a musician, and I went back to graduate school to get a degree in music composition. And at the end, your final project is a concert. And I tend to do things in a big way. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do a concert, might as well do it at Carnegie Hall. And so we had, I had modern classical music that I wrote. I had songs and a singer-songwriter I arranged for. I had a George Bush impersonator that I wrote a song for. And then I had a children's choir that I had worked with. I taught a songwriting class to children. And at the end, we wrote a song together, and I arranged it for orchestra. And the climax of the concert was just beautiful, having all these kids singing with the orchestra. And I was just in the audience, just taking it all in. So it was a really special moment. And my young boys who were like 6 and 4, my 2 oldest at the time, they started the concert off with a comedy act. So it was really a fun day.
I guess.
Did you all go next door? Did you all go next door to the Russian tea rooms for what should have been
not that day, but many times? Yes,
many times later. We should open a Mrs. McCartney's tea stand right outside and steal all their customers.
Not a bad idea.
That's
Do they have your tea there?
They don't.
No,
they don't. Only Russian tea.
Well, Russia doesn't actually grow much tea. They import it from India and China. But the number one, there's a fight between 2 countries to say who consumes the most tea, and currently it's neck and neck with Turkey and Ireland.
Yeah.
So,
Turkey and Ireland. Interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
So now you know. Madam's just written a book. All You Need Is Tea, and
it's the history of tea.
It's the whole history of old teas from all around the world, from 300 BC till the present day. So.
Speaking about people who are doing a zillion things, I mean, you guys.
I know. My cookbook just arrived yesterday from the printer. This is with a little help from my scones.
Oh wow!
It's
great. That's great.
Disappearing British recipes from the 18th and 19th century. So.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, that was some research.
Yeah,
I bet.
That was fun.
Mm-hmm.
So
now you've appeared in lots of television shows and a few movies. How did that all come about, and what did you do?
So my lectures, my Deconstructing the Beatles lectures, which I started about 12 years ago, are me talking about the creative process of the Beatles. And now other artists like Pink Floyd. And someone had approached me about turning them into films. And so I have 11 films that have played in cinemas around the US and Canada. They're all available for streaming from my website. And then the next step was someone said, this should be a public television show. So we filmed 6 episodes. They've been running in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area for about a year. It's been a big success. I was just lecturing down there. I gave a lecture as a pledge benefit on Saturday. And from that was so successful. Now it's going to be going national in February, the end of this year.
Great.
And hopefully a season 2. We'll see.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Good. How wonderful.
When you started the deconstructing business 12 years ago, did you obviously the Beatles was your first thought? Did you think to go chronologically, or did you pick your favorite album first and work around it?
Yeah, it was completely accidental, the whole thing. I put together a talk in my living room for friends. And the reason I did it was partly because I had a studio designed by John Stork, who did Electric Ladyland. He designed a studio in my house, and I was outside New York City, and I had all these friends in New York, and I wanted them to come out and see my studio and get some business from them. And I had heard some cool new Beatles outtakes, and I thought, well, free beer and a lecture on the Beatles, that'll get them out. And I had 40 people in my living room. And I was, 10, 15 minutes into the talk, and people were saying, when are you going to do this again? Will you come teach my college class? There's a theater you need to do this at. And it just sort of came from that. So my first lecture was on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, natural one to start with. And I started doing that, and I got referred from theater to theater, and people started saying, well, when are you going to do another one? And I hadn't even thought about that. So I said, okay, maybe I'll do the White Album. And that was the next one. And so it wasn't chronological. It was kind of all over the place. And each time I began with, oh my gosh, how am I going to possibly talk about this album? Am I going to find enough material? Is it going to be anything interesting? I mean, I don't want stuff that people can just pick up a Beatles book and read. I want to show the music paired up with what they read. And each time it's just been such a thrill to dive into all this material, and then to figure out what is the story I want to tell. What do I have to leave on the cutting room floor because it can't go on for 6 hours? And what do I want to put in there that gets my goal is an aha moment on every slide I put up. So I want people to go, oh wow, I didn't know that. And
our friend Joanne is just saying she saw Deconstructing the Beatles in a movie theater back a few years ago. It was fascinating. And
Thank you, Joanne.
With Joanne saying a few years ago, the thing is, your work is timeless, really, isn't it? If people have missed it, it can go around again and again and again. It is what it is.
Yes, I mean that's the great thing about the Beatles is it doesn't age out. I have, 90-year-old people bringing their great grandkids to my shows, college students. Yep. It's not just musicians, of course. It's anyone who has a love for the creative process, and it doesn't. It's not like if I were doing Herman's Hermits or Elvis, or there's a limited audience,
right?
And part of my problem is, where do I go from here? Because the Beatles are so universal,
right?
So that's why I chose Dark Side of the Moon as my first non-Beatles lecture, because it comes up all the time.
Yes.
And people wanted to do that, and I wanted to see if I could do a non-Beatles lecture and it would be as interesting and attract the audience.
Yeah.
And then there's, there are things like Pet Sounds.
Yeah.
I would love to do Purple Rain. I would love to do Ziggy Stardust. There are iconic albums that I think span a larger audience.
Yes.
But,
yes.
But there are plenty of albums that we all love, I'm sure, that I'm just not going to attract the audience for. They're YouTube videos. They're not.
I'd love to hear, Tapestry, Carole King, but you would have
that's amazing.
You'd have a much smaller audience. If you do ever do anything on Pet Sounds, by the way, a dear girlfriend of ours and a TeaFlix guest, Candace Stewart, runs East West Studios. Studio 3 is the Pet Sounds room. If you need to film in there.
Oh yes! Wow.
If you need to film anything in there, let me know.
Good to know. Thank you.
I'll put you in touch with Candace. She's really.
Thank you.
The spirits are still there. Martin's just reminded
yeah.
The back of the Pet Sounds room used to be the end of the building in the parking lot, and it's on the 9,000 block of Sunset, and that's where they all used to go outside and smoke Gauloise, those horrible French cigarettes that smell like France, and and sometimes we'll, if you're in there late at night, whatever. Now it's an extension, so there's another little studio. There's a dubbing room and a studio in the back, Studio 4, and a Pro Tools room. And there's a passageway, and then the parking lot is moved over to the other side of the building. But I've been there dozens and dozens of times, but 3 or 4 times loading out gear. I said to Martin once, because he unfortunately still smokes cigarettes, I said, honey, you can't smoke in here. You got to go all the way around the corner. And he said, it's not me. I didn't smoke. You can still sometimes smell.
Wow.
The Gauloise. Now, whether it's seeping out of the wood or the brick or the whatever, or it's just the ghost of, Beach Boys past, I don't know. But it's really a place to be. It's also the same room where David Cassidy sang "I Think I Love You." Oh,
which was my first album, the Partridge Family album. My first non-classical album.
Me too. So if you get out here, obviously we'll have to have a cup of tea. But if you ever want to do anything in the Pet Sounds room, let me know, and I'll just hook you up with Candace. And
thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And you've given me a good idea also on Carole King, because I think Carole King would be a great person to do, not necessarily just Tapestry, but maybe a retrospective of some kind. Of course, she's had a musical and everything, but maybe there's some interesting things to uncover about her songwriting, and the whole partnership with Jerry Goffin. And
one of our, again, connection there, I don't know Carole personally, but one of the directors and an old friend of mine that we work with and represent at McCartney Studios is a young man by the name of Denny Tedesco, who his father was Tommy Tedesco and the Wrecking Crew.
And he did the movie, Yes,
and he did the Wrecking Crew, and he's just completed a movie called The Immediate Family, which is
wonderful. I've seen it.
Oh, okay, great. Russ Kunkel, Leland Sklar, Danny Korchmar, whatever, and of course Carole King is in it. So again, if you get a project off the ground, I'll introduce you to Denny and see if there's a there, and he can plug you into all those people.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you.
That's what this TeaFlix has become. Outside of just the Beatles family and Beatle fans, the amazing amount of people that we've been able to connect with and then reconnect.
And they've all sort of created their own community.
Right.
Quite apart from us,
Right.
Well, that is the fun thing about doing stuff like this, is connecting people. I mean, look at me and Ken. I mean, we connected, and Ken's introduced me to a lot of people. I've introduced him to people, and you know, and our networks have grown. It's part of the fun of this.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Well, Joanne Grubbs, that was on a moment ago, she holds lovely afternoon teas for a group of people. And she's ordered and bought my tea more than anybody, I think. So when I published this book, I put her in the acknowledgements, and she was so pleased.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would be too, but Joanne is a huge supporter of Ange and our teas.
Actually, I'm going to mail her she's ordered another book today on some tea.
Yeah.
So when this is over, I'll be,
but
it'll be in the mail today, Joanne.
We've all become sort of a family.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's old, but it all comes back to the love of the Beatles and their music. It's just, that's, again, the cog in the middle of the wheel.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So you also you've taken your Beatles courses all over the place, but I think you were lucky enough to speak at Yale, were you not?
I did. I actually taught a semester there, and it was a blast because students who were coming in know the music, but as far as they're concerned, Love Me Do and Here Comes the Sun, it's just all lumped together. So to be able to expose them to the history and how they evolved, which is so fascinating, how they moved along with each album, each single, it was a lot of fun. And I made them write some papers and things. It was a tough course.
So as far as curriculum, how does that work? So if I'm a Yale student and I electively take your class, what does that either get me credits in? Is that the liberal arts program or?
Right. So Yale has a program they call college seminars, and they bring in special guests to teach them. And it could be anything from, you know, a Secretary of State talking about, you know, foreign policy, or someone. When I was there was a course on the Rubik's Cube, a whole semester course on the Rubik's Cube. Yeah. So and students get credits. It doesn't credit towards their majors or anything, but they get credits for taking the course. I don't know how many, but it counts. And they're always very interesting.
Oh, I bet. Fascinating. Sure.
So how do you, what is your process when you pick an album? Like, let's talk about Dark Side of the Moon, right?
Yes.
You decide on an album, you go down a rabbit hole. What's the first stop you make in the rabbit hole? What do you need to know first?
So the first stop is gathering up everything I can find, audio and video.
Okay.
And seeing what's out there, because that's going to tell me what kind of stories I can tell. And then reading and researching, and then looking at the things in the books that talk about, you know, Gilmour switched to a different effect, and thinking, oh, wait a minute, I have an audio clip that was recorded around there. I wonder if I can showcase that.
Yeah.
And so that's what's interesting. It's not just me standing up there and reciting what I read in a book, because anyone can read the book. It's really about the music for me. The music is the centerpiece, and the who did what and how they came together is all fuel for the music that they created. So I mean, it took me maybe 5 months to put Dark Side of the Moon together, along with other projects. And then once I have the outline of the story, now it's finding, you know, editing the video clips, finding photos, designing the presentation, and making it all fit within, you know, 90 minutes to 2 hours. So.
Wow. And it's basic. It's a passion for music, because you are obviously a very successful composer and musician yourself. But I think it's what I'm feeling from your product, your brand, if you will, is that you really connect the dots for people, that it's all there in plain sight, but nobody has had the time or the passion to connect it all together, like, because, you know, there's connective tissue in every artistic project.
Exactly. Yes.
When they get released as, you know, on a cassette and a blue vinyl and a DVD and a this and a that and the other. No, you get so overwhelmed oftentimes with the marketing and the re-releases and the box set and the newsletter and the Instagram post that you don't really take a deep breath and go, okay, where did this all start? Right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And what I love, I get producers and composers and musicians, and then I get people who've never picked up an instrument in their life.
Wow.
And I want them all to say to me, I learned something I never knew. There's a concept that I never understood how because came from the Moonlight Sonata, but now you showed me it, you illustrated it. I never understood what that sound was that I heard, or why did this song sound, why was the bass part so weird? All of that. When I talk about the aha moments, I want it to be something which really makes you appreciate the talent behind the music and what goes in, the stuff that's left on the floor, and the stuff that makes it into the song.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and also, the thing that fascinates me is that, until George Martin, there really wasn't a producer with a brand name. They were all just engineers in little white coats at EMI or whatever label, or somebody's cousin in the garage. And, all of the moving parts of all of the records. I mean, we thank God before he passed, we got to spend hours with Jeff Emmerich. He produced and remixed one of our artists, Nick Marshall's Beatles song, Things We Said Today. And so it was just so great to be able to catch up with him at what unfortunately turned out to be the end of his life. But, the challenges he would say is, they had 2 tracks.
Right.
Then they had Then they had 4 tracks.
Right.
Now,
exactly.
These kids open a DAW in Logic or Pro Tools or Motu or whatever they're using, Ableton, and it's like, oh well, if I screw it up, I just delete it and do it again or double it, and they don't. Oftentimes they don't. They don't know that if you copy paste a track and double it, and then they go, it sounds weird. Well, yeah, it's called phasing. All of the things that these engineers had to work out with slide rules.
Exactly.
And their egos.
Yes. Yeah, and I always, give examples in my talks of, like, in Pro Tools, this would take 1 second, but these guys are working with tape and 4-track machines, and they were what was so wonderful about George Martin and Jeff Emmerich, who I always, give kudos to, was that, especially early on, when the Beatles didn't know a microphone from they knew live performance, they knew nothing about the studio, and to have someone like George Martin, who not only was there to produce them, but was teaching them and mentoring them. Other producers at the time didn't do that. They said, record it, okay, next track. And both George Martin was a good teacher, and the Beatles were hungry to learn.
Yes.
And so by the time you get to 65, 66, they're really partners. It's no longer mentor and mentee. It's now partners. John Lennon says, I want my voice to sound like I'm chanting from the hilltops. And Jeff Emmerich says, how am I going to do that? Well, they figured this out together. Yeah. The scores for some of, the Strawberry Fields and things like that. It was a partnership between the Beatles and the engineering team. And that's what's one of the things that makes the Beatles so unique is they would not have been the Beatles, in my opinion, without George Martin, without Jeff Emmerich.
That's right. No, absolutely.
And Jeff was only 16 when he started in that job.
Yeah.
Totally green, he reckoned.
And they had to wear uniforms, like little white coats, like they call it. That's where the term engineers came from, because they were literally engineers. We've had on this show, we've had the great George Massenburg from Massenburg Design Works. And there's just so much mathematics used to go, and Nico Bolas and Frank Filippetti, they're part of something called the MET Alliance, Music Engineering Technology Alliance.com. And they all come from a crazy engineering math background, but they just have brilliant ears, and they figure it all out.
It is. You're so right. It's math, it's physics. And the other thing to remember is that the engineers, a lot of the engineers at EMI wanted to do their jobs and go home.
Yeah.
And when they were told, well, can we put the microphone over? No, sorry, the microphone goes there. And this is the one we use on the bass drum.
Right? They would measure it.
Yeah.
So when the Beatles got these young people like Jeff Emerick, who was 19 when he started with them, they were afraid to break rules. And a lot of the things, you know, when Jeff Emerick would stick microphones into the bells of saxophones, you didn't do that at EMI, but he did. So the willingness to experiment, there were a lot of engineers at EMI who were brilliant, but who had their way of doing things. And this is the way we do classical music. This is the way we do pop music. And sorry, we don't change the microphones. We don't add, effects or whatever.
Right.
And that's something that the engineering crew really brought to the Beatles.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of these people, Jeff was young. He didn't have a family yet. So he didn't have to leave at 5:01 p.m. and clock out to go home to kids. A lot of these engineers were older. They had families, and they had this mentality of a 9-to-5 job. They took off their little white coat and they put on their overcoat and they punched their ticket and they got on the bus. They weren't interested, because if there's no overtime, what's in it for me, right?
That's right.
If they weren't going to make any extra money, they could not possibly have dreamed that these 4 scruffy lads who spent half the day down the block in the pub waiting for Jeff to come down and get them and go, okay, we're ready, come back, could have put their name into the history books.
That's right. And a lot of them, they were used to recording jazz or classical music.
Dudley Moore and the piano people. And
exactly. And these guys come in, they bring these beat up electric guitars and drums and so forth. It's a waste of my time. I don't want to deal with that. I want to go back to recording the orchestra. Right. It's a fad. So so you're exactly right. I mean, and these are the things which change music, is that the younger engineers, the younger people, and people like George Martin, who are looking for a way to distinguish himself from his peers at EMI, they're willing to take a chance, and they're willing to try new things, and it pays off.
Well, and the long-suffering Lady Judy, let's not forget her, God rest. I mean, George was never on time for dinner at home. So it's almost like an Olympic athlete. It takes a village, it takes a family, it takes, and the wives, Cynthia, and Jane Asher, and subsequently Linda and Yoko and everybody, Maureen. It was a sacrifice when they were either in the studio or on the road. They were working musicians, and I think in those days it just looked like everybody thought it was a nonstop party, and scotch and a cup of tea in the morning, then scotch and coke all afternoon, and maybe a little Pacalolo on the weekends. But they were actually doing something that truly changed the world.
No question about it. And there's no question in my mind, though, that Paul was the taskmaster. He was the one who said,
yes, I think so.
We're going to record, time to get back in the studio. Okay, we're going to do this. I mean, he really, especially after Brian died, Paul, he's another one who's working on a reissue, a film, a live thing, a concert. I mean, all over, doing all these projects, and God knows how many he has in the air at one time. But he's one who, when you're that creative and you're that much of a genius, you can't turn it off. It's always going, right?
That's right. No, that's right. It's like my husband. He's just, he'll jump out of bed in the middle of the night and go pick up a guitar or write something down, and there you have it. But I think that ethic came from Jimmy Mack, right?
Oh, yes.
Punching the clock at Hannay's.
Yeah.
And, he used to say there's cleanliness is next to godliness. And if you're not punctual, you're not reliable, anything. And you're not reliable, anything. You're not anything.
Right.
And so, that being drilled into Paul growing up, especially losing his mum at 14, my dad was a single dad with 2 young boys, 12 and 14. And so the house was run by like a regiment. On Mondays, Auntie Ginny and Auntie Millie would come over and do the washing and fry up from whatever was left over from the Sunday roast. And everything was run like clockwork at Fourth Lynn Road. And so, when you grow up with that, my dad couldn't join the army because he was deaf in one ear. And so, the conscription was gone by the time Paul and Michael grew up. So there wasn't this sort of national service thing, but I got it. I mean, I was only 4 when Ange married Jim, but again, their working class ethic shaped who I am. I'm never late for anything. If I am, I have a conniption fit and 73 texts go out telling you why. If I shake your hand and look you in the eye, a deal's a deal. My word's my word, my word's my bond. You know, it's just all that old-fashioned stuff. And I think that's where it came from with Paul, with the clock is ticking. Somebody's paying for the studio time and the engineers. If we're not productive, it's going on somebody's bill, and that somebody's probably us. Right? Time and motion study. You know, they used to have factories in Liverpool. Do you remember? The time and motion people.
Absolutely, yes.
They'd come and stand on factory lines and say, well, you're moving that box 3 times. You could move it once.
Right. Right.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's where when you watch the films, you know, Peter Jackson stuff, it doesn't surprise me at all that's how he was, because that was his day job.
Yep. The other thing I'll say, which really struck me when I visited Paul's house a couple times, was you get the sense that it was a fun house, right? Despite the hardship.
Which one? Cavendish?
No, I'm talking about back in Liverpool,
where
you have. Yeah, so Mike's doing his photography and Paul's got his guitar, and it just felt like there was a bond there with Jim. Yeah, I don't, you know, it could be me just reading into it, but I felt John's boyhood home felt a little colder than Paul's.
A little fractured,
a little more polished.
And
he was very house proud, and she was very strict. And I don't see. My dad was a musician. There was a piano, you know, in the living room. There still is at Forthland Road, and there were.
I played it.
Oh, there you go. There's there was a piano in almost every house, but Mendip's was, I think, more about sort of the lounge room and showing off the neighbors. It was very Mrs. Bouquet, you know.
Exactly. Or trying to be, right?
Right. I think. And yet, John's mother, you know, Julia, was a banjo player, and so I think when she died, when John was very young, that was sort of, he was stuck in this posh, semi-posh household. And Paul grew up, you know, you've been to Forthland Road, it's teeny tiny, but there was a piano downstairs and they gathered around it, and Uncle Joe would come over and they'd sing barbershop quartets. And we used to do that every New Year's Eve. All the Macca family would you know, go around and sing. And so I think my dad allowed them to be a little bit more creative than perhaps John was allowed to be in the house.
I think, you know, that's the other thing. There's a piano in that house. There's not anything in Aunt Mimi's house, right? You know, and piano, as Paul, you know, always talks about, you know, the sing-alongs, which he can still do. You know, he can still sit down and play, and that's you know. I know, because that's the way I love to be, you know, whenever there's a piano, to sit down, play, and have people gather around and sing, and just days turn into, you know, late hour of the morning. And there's something about that builds a community and you know, put smiles on people's faces.
Absolutely. Every New Year's Eve started with Carolina Moon, keep shining. And even if you couldn't sing, you were given something to bang or rattle or, you know, whatever. And they used to definitely, you know, they used to do all these barbershop 4-part harmony quartets, you know. He's Karen, our friend from Edinburgh, saying, do you know, Angie, if Jim encouraged Paul to be a choir boy? I know he encouraged him to play the piano.
I think he did, yes. He auditioned to be in the cathedral choir. I don't think he passed the test, but...
That is true.
Mike got married in Carrog in North Wales to Angie Fishwick, Benna's mum, and so not the one in Penny Lane. He married Rowena there, but Mike's first marriage was in Wales at the same church
where Jim and I got married.
Angie and Jim got married. That's great. See, this is what I love about TeaFlix. We get into all of these conversations. What you and I are talking about, they're just, Joanne's saying she got the feeling the same thing on the National Trust tour. Forthland Road felt very warm and homely. Even though it's really sparse. I mean, the kitchen's like something out of Upstairs Downstairs, isn't it?
Right.
You know.
Well, it just shows that money isn't everything, right? I mean,
absolutely.
100%. That's amazing. So you've got all of your deconstructing the music, including the Beatles and Pink Floyd. We've talked about some of the albums you might like next? Do you run a poll anywhere, any of your social media, or on your Facebook?
What albums to do next? It's very informal. People come up to me after in a Q&A and say, when are you going to do, OK Computer by Radiohead or Goodbye Yellow Brick Road by Elton John? I mean, so I have to decide, what to do next.
Well, how big is the audience?
There's a lot of demand for the Beatles, of course. So I could just do the Beatles lectures the rest of my life. But I like to learn. I like to explore other artists too. So we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah. So is it because of the breadth of the information? Is a bigger band like Chicago or Earth, Wind and Fire better for you just because there's more stuff out there rather than a solo artist like a Billy Joel?
Right. So far, all I've done really is albums. So one of the things I'm considering is there a way to do Chicago? I mean, I could talk. Chicago is one of my favorite bands. I could talk about them for weeks. How do you make a 90-minute presentation? Is there one Chicago album? Their greatest hits, maybe. I don't know that everyone knows the songs, because when you walk into a Beatles talk, you're talking to an audience where everyone knows the songs. So when you say, something or Here Comes the Sun or Blackbird, you people know it. If you go into a Chicago talk and you're talking about Chicago 2 and you're playing Fancy Colors, I mean, fans know it, but
yes, you're right.
So it's both. Is there enough interesting audio material and video material out there, and then is there enough literature to do the research? And then can I make a good story? And is there a way to do it in a way that when I say I'm deconstructing Chicago, I'll fill a room or or I'll make a TV series or something? I don't know. So that's really the trick. I would love to do, I have box sets up the wazoo. I would love to do everybody, but the Who, I would love to do Who's Next. Amazing album. And I think that would have, there's lots of material. That's an album that people know at least several of the tracks, I would say. Most people do. That could be a really good one to do. So there's no lack of material. It's just a question of
and maybe it's, if you look at each demographic, coming from the marketing maven bit, you look at each demographic, very first thing when we brand a new client and build them a website and do all of that stuff is, who is your audience? What is your message? And then you tweak the product.
That's right. So for example, I'm a big Taylor Swift fan. There's Rob Sheffield's book comes out, I think, in 2 weeks or so. He's done a deep dive into Taylor Swift. I think she, by people our age, is underappreciated as a songwriter. So could I do a talk, and would I attract younger people to that?
100%.
They'd probably, rip me to shreds because they know more than I do. But there are, my group right now, I would love to find ways of getting to younger people, and that means exploring some artists who maybe are still alive and in their 30s as opposed to in their 70s and 80s. So, again, lots of ideas, but I have to figure it out.
Karen, no, Angie didn't ever meet Mr. Hannay, did you? From Jim's the Boss? No. He's just saying Quadrophenia, the Who would
Quadrophenia.
Be great.
Sure, Tommy, Quadrophenia. I mean, you could.
Oh, brilliant!
But could you not do the music of the Who and cherry pick 3 tracks from each album?
Right. Well, so yes, and that's as I was saying with Carole King. That's another idea to do is to do some kind of a retrospective, even if it's like. There's a wonderful podcast I'm listening to right now on Stevie Wonder about the 5 classic albums from Music on My Mind to Songs in the Key of Life.
Yeah.
And I'm like, God, I should have done that. That's my thing is maybe to take a period of the Who's Next, Tommy, Quadrophenia or whatever, and talk about how they changed, talk about Rolling Stones, Beggar's Banquet and Let It Bleed and Exile. So all of this is possible. It's a question of time and where I devote my resources.
Well, of course. And one of the people I was yesterday after the composer's breakfast, we popped into the Real Inn in Malibu and had a little just, man and wife lunchtime sort of planning session for where we go next with Verified Voice Vault. And I'm like, how do people like Billy Joel? John had Paul, Paul had John. Billy Joel did all that shit all by himself.
That's right. That's right.
That blows my mind.
Yeah.
And for 40 years,
Yes.
Yes. Right. So maybe looking at, I just didn't know if you needed like 5 or 7 or 8 members of a band to make enough material to tell the stories for all the different instruments and all the different inputs.
No, I need to clone myself is what I need.
Yeah.
Which is why, actually, in all seriousness, the partnership with Ken has been great because we're doing some things together. And we have some ideas of projects that we work on together, and it's wonderful to have someone to bounce ideas off of. When I'm designing a presentation, it's me locked in a room and saying, what photo do I put on the slide? So, but yes, I mean, I would love to have, I have a nice presence on YouTube and TikTok, but I'd love to be churning out videos all the time. It's just, I mean, it's
only one of you. I know. It's like us putting out fires and putting out product and servicing clients and doing, mouse on a wheel time. Yeah. Springsteen is another amazing one.
Springsteen, yep. I've got the Ken Springsteen book on my desk over there to read, and Small Faces. Someone mentioned. I mean, there are lots of bands that maybe are underappreciated that maybe I could shed a light on. Like the Faces. So
well, fascinating stuff. I mean, I hope you keep going and going forever.
Well,
I hope so too.
Be 150.
That's all right.
At least. Yeah.
Andrew's going to be 152, so
I'm going to be 95 in about 3 weeks.
2 weeks.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah.
Well, my dad is 93, and you guys, you could form a team because he's unstoppable too.
Good. That's fantastic. That's amazing. So, as our regular viewers will know, that our special guests get a limerick. And so if you are sitting comfortably, well, first of all, before we go into that, tell people it's been scrolling across the bottom, deconstructingthemusic.com, but you also mentioned the Fab Four courses.
Yes. So the Fab Four Masterclass, and you can get to it from my site or from fab4masterclass.com. That's the class that Ken and I will be teaching every month on the Beatles. It starts tomorrow with our very first class on rock before the Beatles. So we're not even going to start with the Beatles. We're going to cover skiffle and Buddy Holly and Chuck Berry and jazz like Django Reinhardt and jump
Lonnie
blues
Donegan and
Tommy Steele and Cliff Richard, everything that led up to making, getting the Beatles interested in music. And it's going to be a fun class. We're going to have a couple hundred people there. We're going to have a chat going, and we're going to actually invite people out on stage. And there's a lot of information on the website, things to get ready for the class if you want. It's going to be 90 minutes plus a Q&A. It's really going to be fantastic. And doing it with Ken Womack is just a pleasure. So fab4masterclass.com is where you can find out about that.
Okay.
That's fantastic. And that starts Wednesday, October the 23rd, 2024.
Tomorrow.
And it's a 5-year journey.
5-year journey. Exactly right. Exactly right. And we have people who signed up from Brazil and Germany and Australia. So even if you can't watch it live, everything's going to be recorded like TeaFlix, so you can watch it at your leisure.
Wonderful.
Great. That's fabulous. Well, everybody's very thankful for you spending the time, and you'll be able to see all these comments back on the Facebook feed. And we're going to put this on the McCartney Times this afternoon at McCartney.com. But if you are sitting comfortably, if you're all in,
I am.
We shall begin. And a 1, 2, 3. Scott Freiman's a real Beatles buff
who knows all their music and stuff.
He lectures with flair at schools everywhere. His knowledge is more than enough.
Ta-da!
Bravo.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. And go to deconstructingthemusic.com and follow Scott on all of his socials if you don't already. I know a lot of you do. And we will be back next week with the fabulous Terry Crane. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you kids all of a sudden.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. This has been fun.
Thank you.
You betcha. Bye-bye.